Welcome to Uncovered Biblical History and Traditions, the channel dedicated to lost stories of the biblical past. Discover stories of pre-Christian historical roots, biblical legends, lost church history and forgotten historical characters of faith. It is very helpful if you hit the like, subscribe and share. Help build my channel and let's take a look together into these uncovered forgotten tales. Picture this, the year is 50 AD somewhere in the rugged hills of ancient Britain. Celtic warriors in their scythed war chariots tear through Roman lines like death incarnate. For 9 long years, one man has held the mighty Roman Empire at bay, outmaneuvering the greatest generals. His name was Caracticus, and he was winning. But then the wind shifted, and with it came a smell so vile, so utterly foreign to British soil, that it would change the course of history forever. Because Emperor Claudius had brought something to Britain that no Celtic warrior had ever faced before, something that would turn victory into catastrophic defeat not through strength, but through an offensive odor that would send British war horses into a frenzy of panic. This is the story of how treachery, war elephants, and the most unlikely weapon in military history brought down Britain's greatest hero. But it's also the story of how, in defeat, Caractacus achieved something far more lasting than any battlefield victory. To understand what happened next, we need to appreciate just how close Caractacus came to driving the Romans back into the sea forever. This wasn't some minor tribal skirmish, this was a full-scale war of independence that had the Roman Empire genuinely worried. Caractacus had been fighting the Romans for nearly a decade, and he was devastatingly effective. He'd mastered guerrilla warfare before the term existed, using Britain's treacherous terrain to his advantage. His war chariots, fitted with razor-sharp scythe blades spinning from their wheels, had become the stuff of Roman nightmares. These weren't just vehicles, they were mobile killing machines. The Romans had sent the best. General Aulus Plautius, one of their most experienced commanders, had been deployed with multiple legions. But month after month, year after year, Caractacus had outfought and outmaneuvered them at every turn. Roman morale was crumbling, and word was spreading throughout the empire that perhaps the Britons were unconquerable. That's when Emperor Claudius made a decision that would echo through history. If conventional warfare wasn't working, he would deploy something unconventional. The ships that arrived on British shores carrying Claudius's reinforcements looked like nothing anyone had ever seen. Alongside the additional legions came massive wooden crates, each requiring dozens of men to move. The sound coming from inside these containers was unlike anything the Romans themselves had heard in battle, deep, rumbling calls that seemed to shake the very ground. Claudius had brought war elephants to Britain. These weren't just any elephants, these were battle-trained giants from the far reaches of the empire, creatures that had trampled enemies from Africa to Asia. Each one stood over 10 feet tall and weighed several tons. They were living siege engines, capable of crushing men beneath their feet or tossing them aside with their trunks like ragdolls. The Roman strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Caractacus's greatest weapon was his scythed chariots, but chariots were only effective if the horses pulling them remained under control. What could possibly terrify a warhorse more than the sight, sound, and smell of a charging elephant? When the two armies finally faced each other on that fateful day, the Roman formation was unlike anything the Britons had encountered. Instead of the traditional straight battle line, the Romans had arranged themselves in the shape of a massive letter L across the battlefield. This wasn't random, it was a carefully orchestrated trap. Caractacus surveyed the field with the experienced eye of a warrior who had never been outmaneuvered. He could see the Roman cavalry positioned on his flanks, ready to exploit any weakness. What he couldn't see were the war elephants hidden behind the Roman lines, and more importantly, the army of his own people preparing to stab him in the back. The Coroniaid clan had a reputation throughout Celtic Britain as opportunists who would switch sides whenever it served their interests. Roman gold had bought their loyalty, and while Caractacus focused on the enemy in front of him, an entire army of his own countrymen was creeping into position behind his forces. The battle began like so many others. British war chariots thundered across the field, their scythe wheels gleaming as they prepared to tear through the Roman lines. This was the moment that had struck fear into Roman hearts for 9 long years. But then the Romans did something unexpected. Instead of bracing for the charge, they parted their lines and released their secret weapons. The war elephants emerged from behind the Roman formations like something out of a nightmare. These massive creatures, decorated with armor and howling battle cries, began their own charge toward the British lines. The ground shook beneath their feet, and their trumpeting calls echoed across the battlefield. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The British warriors looked at these charging elephants and didn't panic. They didn't break ranks. They didn't flee in terror. British courage was made of sterner stuff than the Romans had anticipated. The size of the elephants didn't intimidate them. The thunderous sound of their charge didn't break their spirit. Even the sight of these alien creatures bearing down on them failed to shake their resolve. But then the wind changed direction. What happened next was so absurd, so completely unexpected, that it would have been rejected as unrealistic if it appeared in fiction. The war elephants carried with them something that no Roman strategist had considered as a weapon: their smell. The offensive odor that emanated from these giants was unlike anything that had ever been experienced on British soil. It was foreign, overwhelming, and absolutely terrifying to the British war horses. These horses, which had charged fearlessly into combat countless times, suddenly found themselves confronted with a scent that triggered every instinct they had to flee. In an instant, the most disciplined cavalry in the ancient world became a herd of panicked animals. The war horses reared, bucked, and bolted in every direction, completely beyond the control of their riders. The carefully organized chariot formations dissolved into chaos as terrified horses dragged their vehicles wherever their panic took them. The true nightmare was just beginning. The scythed chariots, designed to be weapons of precision warfare, became instruments of random destruction. With the drivers helpless to control them, these blade-fitted vehicles careened through the British lines, cutting down their own warriors with the same efficiency they had once used against Roman soldiers. Caractacus watched in horror as his greatest weapon turned against his own army. As if the situation weren't desperate enough, this was the moment the Coronii chose to reveal their treachery. While Caractacus desperately tried to maintain control of his center, where panicked horses were wreaking havoc, and simultaneously coordinate defense against Roman cavalry attacking his flanks, an army of his own people struck from behind. The Coronii had been perfectly positioned for maximum devastation. They knew exactly where Caractacus's reserves were positioned, where his supply lines ran, and where his command structure was located. They struck with the precision that only insider knowledge could provide. Caractacus found himself fighting a three-front battle with an army that was tearing itself apart. Roman cavalry hammered his flanks, panicked chariots destroyed his center, and traitorous Britons carved up his rear guard. It was a military disaster of unprecedented proportions. The L-shaped Roman formation had worked exactly as planned, but it was the unexpected elements, elephant odor and Coronii betrayal, that transformed a difficult battle into complete catastrophe. As the British lines crumbled around him, Caractacus faced the hardest decision of his military career. His closest advisors shouted over the chaos that all was lost, that he had to flee before the trap closed completely around him. For a warrior who had never retreated, the decision to abandon his army was agony. But Caractacus was more than just a warrior. He was the symbol of British resistance, and as long as he lived, that resistance could continue. While the Romans focused on mopping up scattered British forces, Caractacus and a small group of loyal followers managed to slip away from the carnage. But even this escape was tainted by betrayal. Aricia, Caractacus's own cousin, prevented him from connecting with Arviragus, another leader who could have continued the fight. This wasn't just military sabotage, it was personal betrayal on the deepest level, family turning against family for Roman gold. Later, when reflecting on his defeat, Caractacus would make a statement that has echoed through history: he had been betrayed, not conquered. In those words lay not just his bitter experience, but a profound truth about the nature of Roman victory in Britain. The aftermath saw swift justice for some traitors. Arviragus launched a campaign of vengeance against the Coronii that was terrible in its thoroughness. But the larger tragedy was what might have been. If the Celtic nations had united as one force, the Romans would have been decisively defeated. What's striking is how isolated Caractacus had become. Despite Britain's history of aiding Gaul, no help came. The Romans controlled those territories. Ireland was cut off by Roman naval power. Scotland was too sparsely populated. Even the northern Brigantes were compromised by their own traitorous queen. Here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. The cross that Caractacus had carried as his banner during 9 years of warfare would eventually become the symbol of the Roman Empire itself. The family that had fought so hard against Rome would be the same family that brought Christianity to the heart of the empire. When Aricia was finally deposed, the powerful Yorkshire Britons who replaced her influence became the backbone of Christian Britain. Centuries later, when faith appeared to be weakening, these same Yorkshire Britons strengthened and preserved it. The Silurians, Caractacus's own people, achieved through their faith what they could never accomplish through their swords. As this account concludes with elegant irony, in the end the Silurians conquered Rome for Christ. If you would like more information where to research this subject, check out my other videos and pause this image and look into these resources. I hope you enjoyed this forgotten biblical story. Leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. This is very helpful. Join me next time for another lost story of our biblical history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.